Mm. Good evening, everyone. This is Zaidus and Jamro, Research Associate at CLAS. I warmly welcome you all to today's webinar. The topic of our discussion is Global Security in Transition, Understanding the Impacts of U.S. Foreign Policy Changes. In an era marked by shifting alliances and emerging security challenges, changes in U.S. foreign policy continue to have far-reaching implications for global stability. Today's session aims to explore these transformations and their consequences for regional and international security. With us today, we have two distinguished guests who will share their valuable insights and perspectives on this important subject. We have Ambassador Riffat Masood, a seasoned Pakistani diplomat with extensive experience in foreign relations. She has served in the UK, the USA, France, Turkey, Norway, and Iran. And our second expert is Dr. Shoaib, who is an assistant professor at the Area Study Center for Africa, North and South America at Qaid-e-Azam University, and his area of research is on China, Pakistan, and the US. To explore these issues in greater depth, I'll start by directing our first question to Ambassador Riffat Masood. Ma'am, how do the recent shift in US foreign policy reflect changing priorities in global power politics, and what do these changes mean for international security and its stability?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much, Zahid, for organizing this webinar, and thank you for involving me in this discussion. As you pointed out in your intro, we are living in a very interesting and volatile times. I mean, for the past decade, we have seen changes and developments taking place in our region, as well as globally, that have a profound impact, not only on Pakistan, but also our immediate neighbors, as well as our region. And the key player in this, of course, for decades has been the United States. After the Cold War and the unipolarity that emerged with the United States being the sole superpower, it has taken on a role which has gradually led to it becoming more and more interventionist in its policies. If you recall, back in the 1930s, after the Second World War and the Great Depression, US had gone into an isolationist policy in which they decided that they would focus on themselves and not get involved in any global, even if it's European issues. But we have seen over the years as security, ideology, and economy have taken a forefront in politics and policymaking for not only the United States, but the world at large. We have seen the United States becoming more and more aggressive and more interventionist. And now, if we just fast forward to what has been happening in the past, say, 1 year or 2 years, and I would not like to only limit this to Mr. Trump. I would like to emphasize here that this has been a US policy all along. In the garb of protecting their national interest, which of course is very important for any country to protect its national interests and to promote its national interests and its principles. But the United States has gone a step further and has decided to, in a way, police the world so that fall into place in what it considers its ideology. And for that, it has it has one major ally in our region, and that is Israel. So to protect the interests of Israel and to promote the importance of Israel, the United States has taken on a more aggressive role in our region. The second part of this is not only protection and promotion of Israel, because those are the core values of the United States, but also containing what they call the containment of China. Because China in our region has, of course, not only in our region, but in Asia and also West Asia and Africa, has also taken on a more aggressive role. And Professor Saab will be able to talk more about it, I'm sure. But with the growing of the Chinese economy and not only now, the United States feels that it needs to place its significant footmark in this region. So for us, I think that the past, in fact, since 2022, I would say, since the Abraham Accords were signed, I feel that the United States has become a more aggressive player in this region, wanting to dominate it with its own version of democracy, with its own policy, protecting its own, and at the same time containing China. For us, it's difficult because for us, China is a very, very important country. And at the same time, the Palestinian cause is also very important. And so is what is happening in Iran. So we are sort of like caught in the middle of all of this. And we have to now focus on what should be our strategy, what should be the choices, the policy choices that our government that we should make to ensure that our own interests are also protected in this aggressive U.S.-Israel nexus.
Well, ma'am, Dr. Shoaib, how do the United States military strike against Venezuela and the capture of President Nicholas illustrate a shift in US's foreign policy and strategy towards a unilateral use of force? And what implication does this have for global security?
I think the strike in Venezuela was in the offing, and it had to come. It was not a question of if, but when. Because if you look at Donald Trump's strategy for to emphasize and have focus on the Western Hemisphere, that means the United States, like the Monroe Doctrine, like the Roosevelt corollary, the United States would like to focus on and to emphasize on its own backyard. And Western Hemisphere remains the territory and sphere of influence for the United States. If things were not working in Venezuela, it had to take a shape. I think Donald Trump gave pretty much time. Of course, we understand he's at times restless. He wants to get things done as soon as possible. But in case of Venezuela, something was in action and probably they couldn't reach a deal and finally this thing happened. But again, we have to tell ourselves that this is not the first time when the Americans have done something unilaterally. There's actually a long, long history of American interventions in the Western Hemisphere. Because we don't live there, because we don't really focus on Western Hemisphere, because the things which happen in Western Hemisphere don't really impact us. So we tend to ignore all those happenings. Otherwise, even most peace-loving presidents in the American history have a history of intervening in the Western Hemisphere. So for a US president, interventions in the Western Hemisphere is something like a routine matter. But this thing happening in 2025 sends a reminder to the whole world that the great powers, if have the wherewithal and capacity and capability, they tend to break international law. They tend to violate the practices, treaties, and all those matters which we think have lots of normative value. The Americans have, particularly under the administration of Donald Trump, they have conveyed to the world that whenever they think that this is a matter of their fundamental national interest, or at least this is how they define it, they will not look toward the international community or international organizations before taking an action. And probably the American action will also embolden other great powers that who will think that if the Americans can do something like this in their backyard, why can't we do it? So we live in a region where there are the Chinese sitting, where there are the Indians sitting, and when there are the Russians. So imagine the Russians, Chinese, and the Indians looking at the United States and telling themselves, Iranians can do it, why can't we do it? And if they internalize these lessons, the region will be much more volatile and much more unstable.
Sure, sir. Ambassador Riffat, I'll ask that how the heightened tensions and widespread protests in Iran, the US has imposed sanctions and weighted up military options while also warning for consequences for human rights abuses. How does this blend of coercive economic measures and military signals shape current US-Iran relations and its regional stability?
Well, taking up from what the professor has said, the United States feels that it needs to have a much more control over not only its own backyard and its own hemisphere, but also throughout the world. And as I said earlier, Israel, protection of Israel is foremost in its foreign policy objectives. And the United States has always seen Iran as a threat to Israel. And the United States and Iran have never had good relations since the Islamic Revolution. During the Shah's time, of course, things were different, but since 1979, we have seen a total change in US-Iran policy. And the sanctions that have been imposed on Iran for more than 40 years have obviously crippled the economy and have frustrated the people of Iran. So the United States is basically aiming at a regime change in Iran. It has been trying to do this for many, many years. It has used lots of tactics in the past. And here, let me just remind you that although it's Mr. Trump right now, but this has been an overall US policy throughout the decades. Even when the Democrats are in power, they don't accept the current regime and the current dispensation in Iran. And the signing of that Iran nuclear deal, which is the JCPOA, which is of course now in abeyance, it doesn't exist anymore. But when Obama reached out to the Iranians through their European partners to sign this joint agreement on curtailing Iran's nuclear program, the idea behind it was that, okay, when we are able to control Iran's nuclear program, eventually, by getting into Iran and getting into relieving the sanctions, we would be able to get inside and influence Iranian people and the Iranian populace and eventually bring about a regime change. So in fact, this idea of regime change is an old one. The only problem is that now the current turmoil also has a background because it started before when the Israeli and US strikes, military strikes took place on Iran, and it had rallied the people together. Now, of course, because of the economic situation, which continues to hurt the people, the US and its European allies, and also many other human rights organizations and other civil society members are focusing on the protests by Iran. And they seem to be missing the trees from the wood because, the wood from the trees, because the idea is not to actually help Iran out of its economic difficulties. The idea is to get rid of this particular regime and impose a regime from outside into Iran, which will be closer to Israel, which will be close to the United States, and which will be basically, like a puppet for them. They have tried this in the past and they have failed. Although they had the Shah there, who was basically their chosen person, but we know what happened after the Shah. Now, when you decide to impose something from outside, it has severe repercussions not only inside the country, but it also has repercussions around the region. And this is a very dangerous precedent. If the United States is able to succeed in bringing about regime change in Iran, then there are many other regimes around Iran and in our region, which the United States will look at again. And therefore, we have to be very careful how this plays out. For Pakistan, our choice is very clear. Iran is our neighbor. Iran is our friend. Iran is a brotherly country. We have no qualms, no problems with Iran. Whichever government is in Iran, we will be, of course, cooperating with them. But we do not want any kind of external intervention in Iran in the pretext of regime change, which could have devastating effects not only on its economy, but also on the political stability of the region. So we have to be very clear in what we say to our Western partners and even to our Gulf partners. I think the Gulf partners have now understood the greater game that the US is playing, and they too are against any kind of interventionism from the United States. But as I said, if any kind of external change comes about from external pressure, that will not sustain, because the Iranian people will not accept it for very long. And secondly, it will have a destabilizing effect in our entire region.
Yes, ma'am. डॉक्टर शोएब आपसे दूसरा सवाल होगा कि हाउ डज यूएस फॉरेन पॉलिसी रिफ्लेक्ट ब्रॉडर स्ट्रेटेजिक गोल्स ऑफ कंट्रोलिंग एनर्जी रिसोर्सेज, और ये किस तरीके से उसका रीजनल इन्फ्लुएंस शेप कर रहा है, और आगे चल के ग्लोबल एनर्जी मार्केट में उससे क्या फर्क पड़ने वाला है इन केस अगर वेनेजुएला और ईरान दोनों पे एक रिजीम चेंज और एक यूएस की इंटरवेंशन पॉलिसी काम कर जाती है.
I think we should not really be much focused on energy policy with regard to United States as an individual case. When we talk about the global market, of course, energy policy will matter. How things are shaped will have impact on the global economy. But we know that over the past few years, the United States has done tremendously well on the energy front, and the United States has got sufficient resources uh, to kind of spend the bad patches. As uh, the as for the question of Venezuela and Iran and the questions of regime change, I think United States will not be the primary victim of volatility in the global energy market. But then this is a gray zone. You don't know what happens once the war begins. You don't know how the market reacts to the news. Otherwise, if you had been noticing the global energy market, there was essentially no volatility when Israelis and Iranians were bombing each other. Although Iran remains one of the largest sources of global energy, but the market was giving up signals of stability. Uh, as compared to Iran, looking at Venezuela tells us that the market in Venezuela has not really been performing pretty well over the last, let's say, 10 to 20 years. Venezuela has not really been able to produce what it can or what sort of capacity it has. So essentially, a small war will not bring any kind of volatility in the global energy market. And as an individual state, the United States is not going to be on the side of the victims in that case. But things can be troublesome, particularly for the East Asian economies. How do the East Asian economies react will be a thing to see. But then in the recent years, we have seen that wars tend to be much shorter. For instance, there was a almost full-fledged war between the Israelis and the Iranians, but then the war only took, say, 12 days. So if there is something like this, I think that should not be a big problem for the global energy market. But then if we see something like Iraq war or Afghanistan war that stays on for years and years, then the trends could be different. But then things have changed from 2000s to into 2020s. The world has moved on primarily to the solar energy, to the wind energy. So there are lots of alternative sources as well. I think a short, brief war wouldn't really impact the global market. That's my understanding of the events, at least.
Yes, sir. And sir, how do you see that China and Russia are perceiving the shift in US's current foreign policy?
Uh, so the shift benefits the Russians. Frankly, Russians were much more they were much more challenged when there was Biden administration, and the Biden administration was uh, actively supporting the Ukrainians. It was providing them with arms, with finances. It was giving pretty much tough time to the Russians at the global forums and almost everywhere. But then Donald Trump and the Republicans, they probably see things differently. First, many in the United States have essentially questioned the very intent and the very meaning of providing support to the Ukrainians because many of them think that Ukraine is not a core national interest of the United States. And then, as an individual, Donald Trump has got respect for other great powers. Uh, for instance, unlike the Democrats, he treats the Russians and the Chinese as almost equal great powers. So you will like to see him talking about President Putin, President Xi Jinping, despite having differences with them, he gives them sort of respect which another great power probably deserves. Uh, Chinese and Russians will look at this calibration in the US foreign policy as an opportunity because at the core, they don't really want a global policeman like United States roaming into their region, telling them what to do and what not to do, how to behave with your neighbors and how not to behave with your smaller neighbors, particularly of China. It's almost encircled by the United States. A United States recalibrating its strategy, focusing more on its backyard, will certainly be a good news for the Chinese. Bad news is the Chinese and Russians will they'll have to pay more for the stability of the system. That is which have to pay, but it's kind of opportunity the Chinese and the Russians because that provides them with more independence and more space to operate and shape the order as they want.
Sure, sir. Ram, with your ending remarks, how this U.S. shift in its foreign policy will impact future of multilateral diplomacy and alliances which U.S. has made with multiple countries.
Well, this is as we see things unfolding, and things are unfolding very rapidly over the past few months. Multi taken a big hit. I think right from the time of not only Mr. Trump, but even before that, when we had the situation in Palestine, in Gaza, we saw that multilateral agencies, especially the UN and even other subsidiary organs of the UN, were not able to really make much of an impact. And it was all basically whatever Israel wanted and whatever the United States wanted. So I think that over the past few years, multilateralism has suffered a blow. And I don't see multilateralism actually recovering from this blow in the near future. Of course, it has led to alliances on the regional level. We have the Arab countries, some of them have come together. We have our own defense pact and an alliance with some Gulf countries. But I think that it is going to be the show of one particular power, and that's the United States. And they are going to basically decide what is to be done. Now, they're very clear that they don't have respect. I mean, President Trump has said, I don't care what international law says. I don't care what the UN says. I don't, so he is basically focused on protecting his own country and his own interests. And he's a businessman. So he wants to make money, and he wants to make money for the United States. Now after, at the moment, first it was Venezuela. Now it's Iran. Tomorrow it's going to be Greenland. Greenland is still very much there. Greenland is also a strategic importance to the United States, so they say. So he doesn't care about NATO. He doesn't care about the United Nations. So therefore, it's going to be him against everybody else. Now, countries like the weaker countries in the region, in his own region, in his own hemisphere, as well as our region, as well as even the Europeans. They are not, I think, in a position, no country is in a position to actually take on the United States and say, no, we have to follow multilateral, we have to follow international law, we have to, of course, speeches are made, statements are issued, promises are made, but I don't think they are able to have that kind of impact. And I don't think any country has really got the wherewithal, the power, even China to that extent. China's policy is totally different. Chinese believe in a different kind of game. They don't really take on any country head on. They have a different type of diplomatic game that they play. And the Russians are too embroiled in Ukraine to be focusing on countering the United States. I feel that with this global dominance of the U.S., and its very close ally Israel is going to actually change a lot of things around the world. We are going to see more and more alliances breaking down, and we are going to see new alliances emerging. And the reason why I say that is because I feel that what is happening in Iran, what has happened in Venezuela, I think it has woken up some of America's close allies, even within our own region. And I mean the Middle East countries, the West Asian countries. And they feel that if the United States is able to continue with its aggressive policy in the Middle East and West Asia, today it's Iran, tomorrow it could be them. And by them, I mean, the Gulf countries, I mean the West Asian countries, I mean the Middle East countries like Egypt even. That is, and we already know that in the Gulf, the United Arab Emirates already has very close association with Israel and with the United States. So there's a kind of wakening up, and you can see it with Turkey reaching out to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia already a close ally of Pakistan, trying to strengthen its relations. We saw it earlier in the Saudi-Iran rapprochement when Saudi Arabia reached out to Iran also to try and sort of soften the hard lines that they had in the past. I feel that two things will happen. One, the U.S. will continue its aggressive role, and it will alienate more and more countries. And secondly, I feel that while multilateralism on a global scale will peter down, but I think regionally alliances will emerge. Countries will come together on a regional basis, maybe 2 countries, 3 countries, 4 countries, to protect their region, to protect their interests. So that is a positive because it means that the neighborhood and the region will become stronger. But at the global level, I think multilateralism will take a hit, and a further hit that it has already taken.
Sure, ma'am. With these concluding remarks, we will end this discussion, and which has provided us with meaningful perspectives and on a rapidly changing global security environment. Thank you to our speakers, Dr. Shoaib and Ambassador Riffat, for joining us today, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you, ma'am.
Good.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Allah Hafiz.